Hey guys, hope all is well. This video is actually a continuation of the series that I started a few weeks ago called Chess Secrets You Wish You Knew. In the previous four videos, I explored a few different themes connected with winning chess games, and many of the themes didn't actually involve material. They were just sort of positional themes that are really critical to winning games. And in this video, I'm going to explore the idea of winning a file. Because sometimes just winning a file is all you need to actually win the game. Um, so actually, normally what I try to do is I try to pull a bunch of examples from other people's games, and then just go over them one by one, and then sort of have a synthesis at the end. But I realized as I thought about it and looking at my own games, I've actually used this time and time again, even from when I was a much lower rated player than I am now. So actually what we're going to do is we're actually just going to look at four different games, parts of different games that I played where the theme actually came up, and talk about a little bit why it was so effective. So this first game, and we're going to do them in order of when they happened. So this first game was in 2009. I was a much lower rated player back then, but well, I was still 2100, but yeah, I definitely wasn't the player I am today, and the themes definitely are still salient. So let's take a look. So in this game, I played Steen Koppenberg. I don't know what his rating is, or it doesn't matter. But let's just zip through to the critical point. So d4, d5, knight f3, knight f6, c4, c6, e3, e6, knight c3, a6, c5, knight bd7, bishop d3, bishop e7, g4. You guys might be like, whoa, this guy played g4? He never does stuff like that. Well, back then I was very bold. And okay, it's not even a pawn sacrifice. If he takes, I can play rook g1 and then h3 if the knight still stays there, so it's not really a pawn sacrifice. But g6, h3, and b6. And this is actually sort of the first critical moment of the game, because after when black is trying to sort of release himself a little bit and trying to sort of get out of the bind, the spatial bind that he faces all across the board. But at what cost here? After b6, I played c takes b6 and queen takes b6. And after queen takes b6, you see the scenario where black has an extra pawn island now on a6 as a consequence of that, or an isolated pawn rather, as a consequence of that break. And furthermore, the c pawn is temporarily backward. And so positionally, I'm trying to hone in on that. So I play knight a4. And then my opponent played queen a5 check, which I think is a bit of a mistake because it allows me to develop with tempo. And so I played bishop d2, trying to attack the queen and still hold the c5 square. My intention was to go rook c1 next. But after bishop b4, I played a3, bishop takes d2, a knight takes d2, and then here blacks decide, you know what, I have this backward pawn, I need to liberate it, and played c5. And then I took. And here's really the first really critical position. Because right now you see a scenario where, with the exception of the a6 pawn, black is pretty much okay. I mean, okay, the bishop on c8 is not, definitely needs to be developed right now. But I'd almost, in many instances, you almost wish that the G pawn was back on g2, not on g4. Because it really doesn't look like castling kingside is completely viable. And I recognize that. I recognize this was a critical moment and that my king safety was not great. But I do have the c file if I want it. And I was already thinking, you know what? My way to play right here is to actually not even castle, but just control the file and try to exert myself that way. And it's amazing how quickly this position just falls apart for black based on this concept of just controlling the file, taking control of a file. So after rook c1, I played with tempo, queen d6. I played queen c2. I thought a very, very important move. The idea being that that I'm still controlling the c file and I'm ready to infiltrate. And the key thing is I'm trying to infiltrate and exchange the queens, because now the static weakness that may be the a6 pawn connected with the fact that I would still control the c file is a really big deal. So black played bishop d7 here, and I played queen c7, and already here it's very, very difficult. Black played queen takes c7, but just to point out, if black did play queen e7, I could still almost force a trade of queens with queen c5. And note that if black tries to avoid the trade of queens with queen d8, then he can't castle. So that was sort of the point of this infiltration on the c file. But the point, furthermore, is that after queen c7, queen takes, rook takes, you might say, oh, this rook is just sort of a lone wolf. But it's actually not, because now the other rook on h1 can very quickly come to c1 if necessary. And again, the static weakness on a6 can become a problem. And already here, white has a pretty decent advantage, in my opinion, based on those factors. Another thing to keep in mind is castles might be a nice-looking option, but actually g5 is pretty annoying to face. So that's sort of out of the question as well. I mean, granted, there are some tactics here. Rook c8, maybe I'd have to take, because there's rook c1 check, but I can go king e2, and already here I like white's position, to be honest, based on the outside queenside majority. That's another story. We're just talking about the taking control of a file. Point is, black actually did play rook c8, and after rook takes, bishop takes, king e2, I'm just replacing the rook that was just exchanged on the file. And now actually the kingside pawns that were really expanded don't even look that bad, because white is clearly first to the punch. The bishop is hitting a6, the rook is coming to c1, and it's very unpleasant, and the position unraveled very quickly after h5, rook c1, king d8, g5, very important move, knight e8, and then h4, putting all the pawns on dark squares. And now ready here, it's very easy to see that these dark squares are going to be very weak. The rook controls the open file, or the c file, and it's already, I would say, almost losing. And I'll play a few more moves. Knight d6, knight f3, the knight's just headed to e5, bishop e7, knight e5, rook e8, and I played rook c5. And already here, I think this is just a losing position, because the a6 pawn is weak, black's rook is not yet in the game, and white controls the one truly open file. And so it's really, really instructive to see how just taking control of a file can really lead to something decisive, particularly when the queens come off the board. Another example where this happened. So that was from 2009. Now I'm going to take you to another example from, when is it from? I believe it's from 2011. Yes, against against another opponent, Lisa. I actually know her personally, and she's very nice. And but in this position, in this game rather, I had another real sort of a real opportunity here to take control of another file, and it really is not something that I miss. So anyways, zip through the game. You might notice that this is the same line I showed about when I was illustrating pawn weaknesses. So keep that in mind. I do actually practice somewhat of what I preach. Fortunately, Lisa actually knows quite a bit more about these lines than some of the players that Ulf Anderson was playing 30 years ago. I mean, theory advances, right? So knight d7 was played. I think when I was showing the example in this position after king takes d1, black played c5, which is probably one of the worst moves on the board that doesn't lose material. But anyways, knight d7, bishop f4, c6, king c2, f6, and e5. Very important that I don't allow e5 for black. And I'm just going to zip through, and we have what looks to be a fairly harmless middle game that's with queens off the board. But all of a sudden with a4, something happens. The idea with a4 is actually to threaten taking the a7 pawn, because I couldn't take the pawn right away after bishop takes a7 because of b6, and then king b7 would just trap my bishop. Note that I can't save the bishop and stop the king b7 with bishop a6 because of rook a8, which just secures one of the bishops that way. So there's two ways to secure the bishop after b6. But after a4, I'm actually threatening to take this pawn, because now, let's say a move like h6 is played, there's bishop takes a7, b6, and then a5, breaking open the diagonal. But defending this pawn actually does prove to be quite difficult, and unfortunately my opponent here played something that's really a bit imprecise by playing b6. The idea is to protect the pawn, but the problem is that after a5, I pry open this file. And it really leads to it's just a disaster. It leads to decisive effect. Because after rook b8, takes, rook a7 check, and then rook b7, again, rook ea1, and I still maintain control of the file, even if another pair of rooks are exchanged. And the pressure just on the a file alone is just too much, because it requires constant attention it requires constant defense of that square, and it just leads to a very passive plan in which I could start to build up other advantages. So sometimes the idea of controlling one file is simply to sort of keep your opponent worrying about that long enough where they fall asleep at the wheel somewhere else. And this is what happens, because after bishop g7, I play f4 to defend that pawn. Rook h8 was played, and then I played b4. And now the idea is to sort of build on this structural advantage and start the squeeze. And what happened was b5, bishop c5, again, taking control of more squares, taking more space, bishop f8, king d2, bishop d5, g3, just slowly improving. Now rook takes a7, rook takes a7. Note, trading the rooks doesn't actually end this ordeal, because after rook b7, I'm not going to trade everything, but instead play rook a6 and keep the pressure on. And you can see that white's controlling the a file, black is still in this passive state, and well, it was I won just over 10 moves later. So with rook b8, king e3, rook b7, king d4, rook b8, rook a7 check, now infiltrating. King d8 was played, and now c4. And after takes, even after all these trades, the pressure isn't alleviated at all. The rook is still controlling the open file, but now it's actually also doing the job of controlling the 7th rank. And after rook c8 and e6, it's just completely lost. You can see that everything is shut out of the game, and well, just a few moves more. King e8, bishop d4, king d8, bishop e5. That's to actually stop the rook from having no moves. King e8, king c5, king d8, rook d7 check, king e8, and rook c7. And that was the game. But you could see that the rook, just having that one open a file, really transformed the position into utter domination. So a lot of times, especially when the queens come off, if the rook just controls one file, a lot of pressure can sort of be manufactured because of the constant attention that defending that file will require. You'll see this in the next example I show as well. That was 2011. I do tend to get better with this over time. And this example is actually going to be from 2015. Now, the funny thing about this game that I'm going to show, or the example I'm going to show, is that I'm going to zip through the opening. But the really peculiar thing about it is I played an awful opening here, like awful. It was actually quite embarrassing. I'm going to zip through, but I got no advantage out of the opening here. And I was just saddled with an isolated pawn and no initiative to speak of. Already here, I wasn't a huge fan of my position. I played a really strange moves, and rook d3 is an awful move because of b5. Very, very strong. I can't take the pawn because of queen a5 check. And so after bishop a2, I was already worried I was going to be worse. I was going to maybe lose the game because there was going to be all this pressure on my isolated pawn and all this. And then I was very surprised when my opponent played queen a5 check, because now at least I could try to trade queens. And after queen takes d2 and king takes d2, I thought, okay, the worst is behind me, and maybe this isn't so bad, because now I am in a position where, again, all my pieces are relatively active, and now I saw a very juicy file. You can almost guess it if you saw the previous examples, and it's the C file. And as a consequence, I thought, okay, now that if I eye the C file, maybe things will work out. But the thing is I still have this ugly isolated pawn here, so I want to show you how this happens. So knight e7 was played, not the best move. Bishop e5, bishop b7, bishop takes, g takes, and now rook c1. Very, very important move. And the reason it's such an important move is that now I have ideas of maybe rook c5 or rook c7, but really just eyeing that file. And here my opponent played knight d5, which I thought was another mistake. I thought it was important to keep the knight on the board, because now I get rid of this bishop on a2 that was doing absolutely nothing by playing bishop takes d5. And after bishop takes d5, you might say, oh, well, the d4 pawn is perfectly blockaded, and yeah, it just looks like black might have a decent position here after rook c8. But the thing is that I control the one open file, and that's the thing. The c file here is most critical. And it's just very instructive, this position, because I think many people would look at it at first glance and just say black is better, but black is not better. And let me show you why. Knight e1, first very important move, relocating the knight to a better square, is doing nothing on f3. Rook e d8, king e3, very important move, protecting the pawn. Note that if rook c8 was played, I would just double. So if like rook a c8, I just play rook c1, and I'm still controlling that file. Rook e d8, king e3, rook d7, rook dc3, and rook a d8, and then I saw the pressure coming on the d4 pawn, so now it's important to trade yet again by playing rook c8. And the important thing is that even though you trade some pieces sometimes, it doesn't mean you're relinquishing control of the file. It just means that you're actually taking away more defensive resources from your opponent. And after takes, king g7, and g3, it was already clear that I'm the one playing. Because once my knight comes to d3, then there's just a total bind on the black position, and my rook on c8 is so active. And, well, again, I'm not going to show the whole game, but after e5, takes, knight d3, f6, knight c5, it's finally white that's actually playing. And after rook e7, b4, my knight is perfectly on a great outpost. My rook is active. King f7, rook h8, just needling. King g6, rook d8, and you can see it's just wrecking havoc now. The rook is just totally wrecking havoc. Bishop c4 is played. Rook d6, just needling even more. King f7, and then I'm going to stop after this move. I thought this was a very clever move, g4, which makes the f6 pawn and the h7 pawn essentially backward pawns. But if you just look at the activity here, the position is totally transformed in the past 15 to 20 moves. And the reason for that is all because of the initial control of the c file. So sometimes I can play an awful opening, and it looks like a really bad game is ensuing. But I have, and it's not just me, a lot of strong players, even when things aren't going well for them, they just know to keep the game going because they're aware that they have this toolkit of ways that they can win games. And one of the things in their toolkit is controlling a file and taking advantage, even if there aren't a lot of pieces on the board. The last example I'm going to give, that was from 2015. The last example I'm going to give is from a game I played in 2016. So you're definitely seeing the full scope of these ideas, because I went from 2009 to 2016. And this game was played at the World Open, actually. I hadn't been playing so much chess, but the World Open in 2016 was a tournament that I did play I did play. And again, a very, very interesting game. Now, the theme, open file, and look at how quickly, or taking control of a file rather, look at how quickly the position transforms. So knight f3, d5, I'm white again, d4, c5, e3, knight f6, bishop e2, knight c6, castles, and g6. Actually, this is a strange way to play, in my opinion, because it's sort of like a reverse Catalan in a way. If you notice my moves with white, I'm not playing in any particularly ambitious fashion. And I don't think that black could afford to play this type of setup with white as essentially getting extra tempo that black wouldn't normally have in these lines. So I thought, okay, I might as well take it, this pawn. And after d takes e5, black thought, okay, I got to recover and play queen a5. And already here I thought this was a little bit suspicious because I get several moves with tempo. So I played a3, queen takes e5 was played, b4, queen b6, bishop b2. I really like my position here because it looks like I'm a little bit quicker to the punch. Bishop g7, c4, d takes e4, and then very important move here, not to take with the bishop, but instead to develop by playing knight bd2, because it's actually so much more valuable to take the c4 pawn with the knight, because the knight would be very active on c4 and really almost dominate the knight on c6. So after castles, knight takes c4, queen d8, and now b5 I played. And again, this is what I was talking about, the knight on c6, knight on c4 dominating the knight on c6, because now it can't go to a5 or to e5. So I really liked, that's sort of part of the reason why I thought it was smart to take with a knight. And after queen takes d1, rook takes d1, rook f takes d1, I already evaluated this position as significantly better for white. And the reason for that is simply like what we were saying in the past few games. Rooks taking control of files are huge. And now black had to play knight b8 because of this b5 move. And then, well, another rook comes to play, rook a7, rook ac1. And I almost stuttered there and was saying rook c7 because that's where my rook sort of wants to go. It's eyeing that square. And you could see here just how sensitive and critical black's position really is, because the black rooks are not ready to contest the white rooks on the open file. Now, again, the material's equal, and there's certainly some work to do, but it's also quite a significant edge already, even with the material being equal, because of this disparity. And so, again, I'm not going to go over the whole game, but just to show you a few more moves. Knight bd7, and now that covers the d file, but again, the c7 square here, based on the other open file, is really ripe for the picking, so I played knight a5. And already here, I was eyeing c7, and as a consequence of that, black actually played b6, trying to continue the development, but that actually weakens a square, like we talked about in previous videos. Push pawns, you create weaknesses, and now c6 is weak. And after knight c6, it's just a really, really great outpost for the knight on c6, and it's just a totally dominant position for white, even with the material being equal. So I'm actually going to stop there. I think those 4 games from 2009 to 2016 were all pretty decent examples of how just taking control of one file can really make all of the difference. And if my memory does serve me correctly, all of these examples also came with queen trades. What really happens sometimes is, I mean, you can of course take control of files with queens on the board and stuff like that. But what often happens is when the queens come off and you take control of a file, it really can be the decisive advantage, because it's not like you're getting checkmated or anything. So there's really the other factors at play there are other factors at play that determine the evaluation. And and if you don't have counterplay, you can just get sort of suffocated really quickly. So I hope that was illuminating. and definitely try to make use of taking control of files in your games, because really just one file is all you need to have a decisive advantage. Thanks for watching.